We live in a time of confusion, polarization, and misinformation. Today, more than ever, it seems as though people can't agree on anything, even reality. When one news source says one thing, and another source says the complete opposite, who do you believe? You might be thinking to yourself, why do people believe things that are obviously not true when the truth is right in front of them? In order to decipher these phenomena, we must first understand something else: cults. I'm Ben, and this is Cult Logic, the psychology of cults. Now you may be wondering, why is it so important to understand cults? You may have heard about the Jonestown mass suicide and the KKK, but the truth is we can see cult-like tactics being utilized all around us in our lives by movements, certain religions, and political parties on both ends of the spectrum. Amidst the chaos of what's happening in the world today, understanding how classical cults operate and seeing similarities in their techniques is the key to their interpretation. Furthermore, anyone can be influenced by these tactics, but by having a grasp on how they work, you'll be able to discern truth from lies, and most importantly, form your own opinion with eyes unclouded. To begin, we need to identify our overarching question: what is the psychology behind cults? To answer this, we'll explore three main subdivisions of this question. First, what are cults, and what are some common characteristics? When you think of the word cult, what comes to mind? If you imagined a group of hooded figures praying to Satan or something similar, you wouldn't be the first. The negative connotation that comes with the word cult is very popular and has been utilized by law enforcement, media, and public leaders to discredit, call out, or accuse religious groups and social movements. According to the Webster Dictionary, a cult is defined by a great devotion to a person, idea, object, movement, or work. This is a rather broad definition that can be tied to many different movements, so let's identify the specifics. According to Penn Today, cults center around a charismatic leader. Satan and Jim Jones are prime examples. But what about more traditional religions? Buddhism and Christianity are both named after a holy leader. So is Islam, which was originally named Mohammedanism. Religions and cults often follow a leader who claims divine knowledge, and many are martyred. Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, and Joseph Smith, founder of Mormonism, was lynched. Another theme that is consistent between what we consider cults and religions is an end day, or a promise of a better life after the one on earth, such as heaven, nirvana, and Zion. Amidst these similarities, what's the difference between a cult and religion? According to Ori Tavor, a senior lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania, cults versus religions is simply a matter of perspective. Religions tend to have been around for longer and are recognized by the public and the state, but the fundamental concepts in cults are the same as those in religions. Tavor notes that, quote, "It takes time for a movement to establish itself as a legitimate part of the religious landscape. A cult doesn't have anything to do with the contents of its religious ideology. It is a term to demonize a movement that is controversial." End quote. An example of this is what happened to the Falun Gong religion in China. In 1999, after the Falun Gong religion became so popular that its followers surpassed those of the Communist Party, the Chinese government abruptly labeled the group a cult, and it was considered something to be feared. By simply acknowledging the religion as a cult, the public turned on the group, and hundreds of thousands of practitioners were arrested and detained. So are all cults just misunderstood movements? Certainly not. There are definitely many destructive cults out there. Cynthia Kisser, who runs the Cult Awareness Network in Chicago, says that although some groups have legitimate purposes, many groups share similar patterns of mind control, group domination, exploitation, and physical and mental abuse. This brings us to our second question: how do destructive cults manipulate the ordinary person? Most people think they would never fall prey to a destructive cult, but they would be wrong. Anyone who thinks they're not vulnerable is a prime candidate to get involved, says Lena Little, who spent 19 years in a cult. Los Angeles psychotherapist Arnold Shannon Block has counseled hundreds of ex-cult members. He says the common theme in all of their lives was a desire for a powerful and totally encompassing solution to their pain. He also mentioned that the majority of ex-cult members were normal people who had experienced either some kind of loss or lacked a sense of purpose or direction. He says, "I believe that given the right circumstances, a majority are vulnerable to manipulation by a skilled and charismatic leader." So how do cults and their charismatic leaders draw in hurt, lost, and ordinary people and keep them in the cult? According to the Palm Beach Post, there are several mind control techniques that destructive cults use. These include group pressure, in which members bond through interactions and create a need of belonging, making it hard to leave the group. Isolation, in which the group separates a participant from reality by both preventing them from verifying facts and feeding them false information. Thought-stopping techniques, such as meditation, chanting, and repetitive activities to prevent logical reasoning. Sleep deprivation, which makes the participant vulnerable to manipulation, and finally sensory overload, in which members are forced to accept massive quantities of information in little time, preventing them from examining the truth being provided. As Arnold Shannon Block has previously mentioned, anyone can be susceptible to these techniques. However, people experiencing great change in their lives, such as the first year away from home, after a job loss or change, or after a sudden death or accident, are especially vulnerable to join a potentially destructive cult. Worse, once people are drawn into a cult, it can be nearly impossible to leave. To learn a bit more about cults and how hard it can be to leave, I spoke to a friend who spent much of her youth in a religious cult.
I fell very deeply into the religion, and was a huge proponent of it and very vocal about it. But that certainly became a struggle as soon as I, started questioning some of the practices and principles and ways of doing things in the church, because the religion was so prominent in the community. It was very much a you're in or you're out type of a thing. And so that included friend circles and really every part of my life. And so when I was a teenager and decided to leave the religion, it was a little bit more than just, leaving the religion. It was really, I was leaving my entire life and identity. And so I, was essentially shunned in a way by my family, my, immediate family, my extended family, and even my friends. And so in a way, I kind of lost a lot of my good friends. And, I see that as very similar to a cult because it almost makes you feel stuck, right? You don't have that support group on the outside to help you, see a different perspective or even just support you in whatever you need in life to get through that process. And so it's nearly impossible to leave, because what you lose is your friends and your family and your identity all at once.
Okay, so cult influence exists out there in the world, and there are destructive cults that have harmful effects on members. But why does this matter? This brings us to our third and final question. How does cult logic explain what's happening in the world today? Well, for starters, a lot of the techniques employed by cults are utilized by parties to influence the public, especially on controversial or political issues. Interestingly, these approaches can be observed on the extremes of both sides of the political spectrum. For example, many on the left utilize cancel culture, which according to Webster Dictionary is the practice or tendency of engaging in mass canceling as a way of expressing disapproval and exerting social pressure. This is similar to how cults isolate those who disagree with their beliefs, like how our interviewee was separated from her family and friends for thinking differently. On the other hand, many on the far right accept alternative facts that are being told to them by charismatic leaders such as Donald Trump, and center-right politicians like Mitt Romney who don't comply or look down upon. A lot of the polarization in politics stems from an extreme partisan media sources, which twist the truth and tell only one side of the story. In the Christian Science Monitor, Peter Greer notes that sometimes Fox News and CNN seem to be covering different Americas. Why did the New York Times cover Story X on one page? Is a common complaint from conservatives. Why did Fox News ignore listing that President Trump did? Liberals retort. When people with extreme beliefs listen exclusively to news that confirms their thoughts, their existing views are reinforced and alternative ideas aren't considered. This phenomenon results in echo chambers, where extreme views become more radical and other opinions are shunned. In an interview of CNN, former cult member and founder of a deprogramming group, Antidote, Diane Ben-Scoter states, "There's fear and there's anger about what's going on in the world today. And people want easy answers to life's questions, and they get sucked in, and they get constantly fed by all these media sources that are feeding them the main messaging that cults do, which is us versus them. This trend of demonizing the other side can be extremely dangerous, especially when aided by misinformation, and can spark conflicts that can reach the geopolitical scale. For example, the Russian attack on Ukraine, which has been all over the news, is fundamentally fueled by propaganda and lies. Although tales of Ukrainian bravery might seem to be all over the internet, the Russian people receive a very different story. In the New York Times, Stuart Thompson writes, "The narrative disseminated online through state-run and unofficial channels had helped create an alternative reality where the invasion is justified and Ukrainians are to blame for the violence. To control the narrative at home, Russia has also shut down access to several websites and threatened the news media with long prison sentences for criticizing the war. Like many destructive cults, which weaponize fear to influence members, Russian propaganda is designed to falsely accuse the Ukrainian people and motivate the Russian people to fight against their geographical neighbors. Cults and religions have been a fundamental part of the human existence since the very beginning. It is in our very nature to seek a sense of belonging and accept easy answers. The issue arises when these sentiments are taken advantage of in the form of destructive cults and propaganda. Through mind control techniques and an us versus them mentality, people can be taken advantage of, and worse, create serious harm. It is not just the Russian war in Ukraine that is influenced by cult logic, by American politics and the very understanding of the truth that is at stake. Yochai Benkler, a professor at Harvard Law School, says, "At the end of the day, if one side most trusts Fox News, Hannity, Limbaugh, and Beck, and the other side most trusts NPR, the BBC, PBS, and the New York Times, one cannot expect both sides to be equally informed or equally capable of telling the truth from identity-confirming fiction." And it's not just the news. Even social media is guilty for polarizing the public and distorting the truth. Take Facebook, for example. Their algorithm is designed to help users find people who share similar interests and share similar views. Users then join groups that only echo their thoughts, and they begin to believe that the mass majority share their opinions. Through confirmation bias and echo chambers, the most radical voices speak the loudest. Brent Kitchens from the University of Virginia writes, "On Facebook, inflammatory content tends to drive the most engagement, and because it elicits emotion, the algorithm rewards that emotion, which can drown out more moderate posts and amplify more extreme ones." If polarization and misinformation are everywhere, how does one remain unbiased and not become influenced by the extremes of either side? The answer is surprisingly simple: have an open mind. Don't be afraid to listen to people who disagree with you, and learn about stories from multiple reputable sources, not just sources that confirm your pre-existing beliefs. But above all, don't be afraid to have your opinion changed by others. A lot of sources in the world today want to divide us, spread hate, and create the illusion of us versus them. There's a lot of chaos in the world today, but by sticking together and trusting the facts, we can get through it.